In 1991, newly qualified nurse Beverly Allitt murdered 4 children at Grantham and District Hospital. In a case unheard of in the UK, she purposely set about attacking those in her care. Her reign of terror left families torn apart by the deaths and numerous other children seriously injured, making this a crime that shook Britain.
Many of the youngsters who survived her attacks at Grantham Hospital were left severely mentally and physically handicapped.
For someone to be arrested for a murder is quite horrendous, but it was absolutely nothing to her. No emotion whatsoever, no fear, no anxiety, nothing.
One thing to say, and that's I want to know how she got the job in the first place.
She should never have worked in that hospital, never.
Beverly Allitt was left alone with her for a few minutes and called out that the child was blue, cynosed and had stopped breathing.
Alarm over what was happening in the children's ward at Grantham Hospital surfaced in spring 1991. The sudden death of 7-week-old Liam Taylor was the first in a series of suspicious deaths or mysterious collapses.
Beverly Allitt hurt these children in order to gain some kudos, something for herself.
She becomes Britain's most prolific female serial killer this century.
I believe she is nothing but a cold-blooded murderer.
Beverly Allitt was employed for her role to care and protect. She did the exact opposite. Behind the facade of her nursing duties, she set about callously killing those who couldn't protect themselves. Child after child was collapsing on the ward. Her colleagues and the families were unaware they had a cold-hearted killer amongst them.
She got the job on the children's ward because they were grossly understaffed. Many of the parents in those early days spoke quite highly of her, so much so that the Phillips family made Beverly Allitt godmother to one of the twins. Somebody that worked hard on the ward, was always keen to volunteer, would change shifts at the drop of a hat, and were friendly towards parents.
The crimes committed by Beverly Allitt will be told through the eyes of those closest to the tragedy. Ward 4, Grantham and District Hospital. 5-month-old Paul Crampton has been on the ward for 3 days, having been admitted with a bad chest.
The doctor had asked for him to be admitted to the hospital just to keep an eye on him, really. And I think they described him at the time as a happy wheezer, so he clearly had a chest infection. And whilst we were concerned that he was in hospital, we weren't really worried. It seemed to us quite precautionary. He seemed quite happy, and clearly that was the right place to ensure that this chest infection didn't become any more serious.
Paul Crampton was admitted under Dr. Porter with what was considered to be a respiratory illness called bronchiolitis. He was on regular treatment for his breathing difficulties, but he wasn't ill, and he was getting better. Parents were happy. I felt that he could be discharged home sooner rather than later.
But as Paul is given his routine drug treatment, nurses notice a change in his condition.
We'd been home for a few hours. We were going back to Grantham Hospital on the Saturday evening to see him. When I got back to the hospital, I walked into a scene of quite horrendous, really. Paul was clearly in some distress. And when I walked in, they said that Paul had taken a turn for the worst. The doctor had been called and was on his way.
When I came to see Paul Crampton, I found him to be very ill with what we call circulatory shock. He was clammy, he was breathing short and fast.
Paul's condition rapidly deteriorates. Doctors are astounded by his decline and quickly battle to save him.
He needed immediate intravenous fluid and checking his blood for suspicions of low sugar and any other possible infection. With difficulty, I managed to insert the drip. By that time, some of the results from the laboratory came back to say that he had significant low sugar. Fortunately, I had given the right fluid and he recovered fairly quickly.
For Dr. Naniakara, Paul's sudden decline sticks in his mind. Over the past few weeks, Ward 4 has been prone to a number of unusual occurrences. It all started just over 5 weeks ago with the unexplained death of a 7-week-old baby, Liam Taylor.
He was taken into hospital because he got bronchiolitis, he got a winter cold, if you like. The parents, thinking that he's in safe hands, decide that they'll go home and have a bite to eat. And when they arrive back, they're quite distressed to see their child naked, blue, and obviously having difficulty in breathing. During the course of that evening, the child recovers, and by the next day is quite well again. The next night, Beverly Allitt is given the job of specialing. Now, what specialing is one-to-one nursing. And she's given the role of looking after Liam. The mother, who's quite drained by this time, goes to bed, has a fairly early night. Father looks in at the child at about midnight. Dad notes that the oxygen level in the blood is 99%, which is almost perfect. At about 3:15 in the morning, nursing staff wake him to tell him that the child's relapsed. The doctor speaks to him, tells him that the child has effectively died and had stopped breathing for an hour and 15 minutes, but they'd managed to resuscitate. The child was being kept alive by ventilation, and during the course of that morning, Mum and Dad talked between themselves and eventually asked the doctors to withdraw life support on the child, and the child sadly died in their arms that day.
When I found that the cause of death was what was described as massive heart attack, I just couldn't believe it.
Liam's death concerned Dr. Naniakara so much, he went to the lengths of requesting a second opinion.
I kept asking myself, did I miss it? Did I miss this diagnosis? But looking back even at that time, on reflection, I did not have any evidence to suggest that he died of a heart attack the way pathologist had described. I did write saying that I cannot accept this cause of death given, and therefore could they please consider carrying out a second post-mortem to confirm or change the diagnosis they had come up with. My requests were completely rejected.
Liam's decline came just 2 days after a new nurse joined the ward, Beverly Allitt.
She had recently qualified as a nurse with one of the lesser nursing qualifications.
I believe she came initially as a trainee nurse, and subsequently she was appointed as what you call a sick children's nurse.
There were no other applicants. I think what they were really looking for on Ward 4 were experienced children's nurses, but there was a shortage and they couldn't get them. So Beverly Allitt was taken on, if you like, as second best.
She helped other nurses in providing nursing care for children who came under our care.
Many of the parents in those early days spoke quite highly of her.
Now, since Liam's death, a general sense of unease has begun to spread amongst some staff. Just 2 weeks after Liam, another boy, 11-year-old Timothy Hardwick, dies suddenly in their care. Then, days later, a baby girl, Kaylee Desmond, collapses. Their rapid decline left the medical staff puzzled. And now, doctors are fighting to save another baby, Paul Crampton. Paul's condition has improved overnight. His drip is removed and he appears visibly better. But this doesn't last for long.
The second attack that Paul had was on Sunday the 24th, and I recall it coincided with them removing the drip.
He was quite shut down, and I had significant difficulties getting a drip into a vein.
Once again, Paul has declined rapidly. Doctors are confused by his illness.
Grey, clammy, cold, lethargic, clear in distress, And this time he took longer to recover. And I was becoming extremely frustrated by the fact that I couldn't gather information, and quite clearly the hospital staff were not able to tell me why Paul was having these attacks.
Doctors now fight to save the 5-month-old boy. Eventually he stabilises, but isn't out of the woods.
This time he took longer time, few hours, before he recovered. Again, the blood tests revealed low sugar, and we had corrected the low sugar with extra glucose.
Paul is stabilised for a second time, but doctors demand more tests to find the root of the problem. Meanwhile, Beverly Allitt goes off duty for 3 days, and Paul recovers.
When I came back that evening, I found, to my somewhat amazement, that Paul still remained in the ward. I then found that he remained in the ward for next few days, and when I asked my colleague, he felt that as he was stable with discussions of the regional centre, that they were happy for him to be kept at Grantham under his care.
A new day on the ward. Beverly Allitt is back on duty. Routine starts with the usual admissions and checks. Doctors haven't had any more incidents over the last 3 days, but the recent spate is keeping them on edge. Paul Crampton's blood test results will arrive any day, and as he waits, Dr. Nanyakara searches for other explanations.
We had our weekly teaching round, and we actually discussed Paul Crampton as to the possible causes of recurrent low sugar episodes in infants like Paul.
As Dr. Nanyakara takes his class, Paul's parents sit by his bedside. Since the weekend, he has been making steady progress.
After the second attack, Paul obviously was going to remain in hospital. We had no idea, and it was never discussed how long. It was only discussed that there were going to be a series of tests which hopefully were going to establish why Paul had suffered 2 hypoglycemic attacks. Regular tests of his blood were being carried out to check the sugar level. So really, for a few days, we were living by these regular blood tests to see his blood sugar was okay. And of course, once it was okay, there was quite a relief, and then you waited for the next test.
But as Dr. Nanyakara's class gets into full swing, the calm is about to be broken.
We got a call from the nurses saying that Paul had collapsed again, and we had to abandon the meeting, and Dr. Porter then rushed to Paul.
Panic strikes Grantham Hospital. Over the last few weeks, children have died suddenly or fallen extremely ill. The staff have no answers for their rapid decline. Paul Crampton, originally brought in for a chest complaint, has been on the brink of death twice. Now, when doctors believe he's just pulling through, Paul stops breathing again. Beverly Allitt has just returned after 3 days off.
I said to the staff, I'm going to the hospital canteen to get some food, I'll be back shortly. I walked back to find Paul having another hypoglycemic attack.
He saw that his son was blue, was twitching, and was quite clearly in yet another attack.
Called the staff, who came and obviously administered treatment to Paul.
And Dr. Porter then rushed to Paul. He then stabilized the child and made arrangements for him to be transferred to Queen's Medical Centre as a matter of emergency.
Since Paul's admission to the ward, Beverly Allitt has been assigned to give him special care. Now, with their son gravely ill, Paul's parents are relieved when Allitt accompanies them to the other hospital.
Kath went with him as an emergency admission to Queen's Medical Centre, and Nurse Beverly Allitt volunteered to go with Kath. She attended in the ambulance with Kath as it rushed off to Queen's Medical Centre.
As Paul Crampton leaves Grantham, the consultants are in a state of disbelief. Patients are collapsing and they have no clear reasons. Dr. Porter has taken another sample from Paul. With 3 near-death experiences, his blood tests must draw some conclusions. Now, despite the collapses, they try to return to normality. But this is soon broken. In the following days, 2 more boys collapse. 5-year-old Bradley Gibson stops breathing after a drip is attached for antibiotics. Then, 2-year-old Yik Hung Chan suddenly convulses after being left alone with a nurse. Remarkably, they are revived and transferred to another hospital.
So it was complete demoralized, depressed state of affairs. In spite of all these continuing activities that were going on, we carried on our work. We offered our very best to those who were in need, who came under our care.
Nurses are now also checking medical records for clues. In the meantime, twin girls Becky and Katie Phillips are admitted. Beverly Allitt is on duty again.
Where both twins were in the hospital under my care with what was considered as a non-specific illness. On inquiry, I found that Becky was discharged home that morning.
Allitt was seen in her room prior to her release, and at about 4:30 in the afternoon, the parents are allowed to take the child home. Within a couple of hours or so, the child becomes grisly, and the GP's called. Mum and Dad dash with the child to Grantham Hospital, where Becky's pronounced dead on arrival.
Becky Phillips has lost her fight for life, and her twin sister Katie is now gravely ill after coming into the ward as a precaution. As doctors now fight to save Katie Phillips, a 6-year-old boy, Michael Davidson, plays down the road with a friend.
I mean, he was round at a friend's house with an adult friend of ours, and the adult was messing about with an air rifle in the friend's house, not knowing that it was loaded. As he was playing around with it, it went off, and the pellet ricocheted around the room and entered into Michael's chest cavity.
Michael is rushed to Grantham Hospital, operated on and taken to Ward 4. His injuries are serious but not life-threatening.
It was thought at the time that there would be no damage and that it was just a matter of removing the pellet.
Surgeons had taken him to the theatre, removed the pellets, and after recovery from the anesthesia, was transferred for further recovery to the pediatrics ward.
As Michael makes a steady recovery, Beverly Allitt becomes one of the nurses taking care of him.
Then we were assured that everything was fine and perfectly normal, and that he would, very rapidly recover, because it was only a very minor operation.
But 2 days after Michael's admittance, horror strikes.
Suddenly Faye got a phone call to say, "Get up here straight away, Michael's in trouble," and asked for an explanation, and said, well, he's blacked out and he was arching his back and just collapsed on the bed.
During the course of his treatment, he'd been injected about 6 times with a particular sort of drug, and on the 7th occasion, when he was being injected with it, he cyanosed, went blue and stopped breathing.
Doctors fight to save his life. Meanwhile, Beverly Allitt continues her duties, having just prepared Michael's antibiotics for his latest injection.
Michael had had a cannula in his left hand since the day before and had had several injections through it and been perfectly calm. So why would he suddenly have an anaphylactic shock at a needle on the 2nd day, being put into a cannula, not stuck into him?
I found he was shaking, making unusual jerky movements of his limbs. He was breathing hard and heavy. His heartbeat was dropping and virtually dropping to almost 0. I then called for extra help, gave first aid measures, provided oxygen, but within few minutes he recovered and became stabilized.
As Michael lies very poorly at Grantham, Paul Crampton is now making a quick recovery at another hospital.
And I remember asking to see the consultant that was responsible for Paul's case, and he said, "You can take Paul home." I said, "Well, how can we take Paul home then? Because, you know, we don't know why he was ill in the first place." In the end, I did take him home, quite late one evening, without any real answers.
As Paul leaves hospital, against all odds, Michael also pulls through. The reason for their collapses remains a mystery. In the space of 7 weeks, 8 children have suspiciously collapsed on Ward 4. Some now lie dead, and the consultants have no medical explanation. Now, since Michael's decline, 3 more boys have suspiciously collapsed. All had been admitted with minor complaints, but were shortly found on the brink of death. Somehow, they are saved by staff again. The doctors are now in a race against time. Is there a common thread? A vital clue to the mystery is about to unfold. The results from Paul Crampton's blood finally arrive.
Dr. Porter had received the results of Paul Crampton to suggest that he had very high insulin levels in his blood in some of the samples. We had a meeting, myself, Dr. Porter and Mrs. Moira Onions, to discuss our continuing growing concerns about these collapses, which were unexplained and unexpected. So we did sit down and put our thoughts together and collated whatever information was available.
As the doctors hold an urgent meeting, a 15-month-old little girl, Claire Peck, is admitted to Ward 4.
She came in with no more than an asthmatic attack. She'd been in hospital the week before. On this particular occasion, she didn't respond to the usual treatment. So it was decided that she would be taken down to the treatment room.
Claire's condition is deteriorating rapidly. As preparations are made, Beverly Allitt is left watching her.
Beverly Allitt was left alone with her for a few minutes and called out that the child was blue, cyanosed and had stopped breathing.
Ward 4 at Grantham and District Hospital is in a crisis. Over the last few weeks, too many children have been falling gravely ill, for no reason. And now, as the doctors call an urgent meeting to get to the root of the problem, another baby collapses.
Beverly Allitt was left alone with her for a few minutes and called out that the child was blue, cyanosed and had stopped breathing. One of the other nurses worked on her and managed to recover the child.
Staff managed to bring the baby girl round, but their efforts are short-lived. As Dr. Porter leaves to talk to the parents, Beverly Allitt is left to care for the baby once more.
And he's astounded when within minutes the shout goes up that this little girl stopped breathing again. So he goes back and he works on the little girl for some considerable time. And to quote his words, he said to me, "It felt as if there was something preventing me saving the life of the child."
Later in the evening, I heard from Dr. Porter that Claire Peck, who actually was under my care previously for recurrent episodes of asthma, had been admitted that evening under his care and unfortunately had died within few hours of admission.
The number of unexplained deaths has now risen to 4. 9 other children have also collapsed in a matter of weeks. Doctors' concerns are now turning to suspicion. Dr. Porter draws up a list of the casualties to find any similarities. Blood and fluids have now been taken to try and find a cause. And as they wait for results, Dr. Nanyakara writes an urgent letter to management spelling out their concerns.
I wrote a letter on the 22nd to hospital management expressing our serious concerns and anxieties about series of collapses that were going on, and also mentioning about the result which Dr. Porter had found of Paul Crampton's abnormal blood result.
As staff wait for a response to Dr. Nanyakara's letter, it now comes to light a vital key on the ward is also missing.
3 days before the Liam Taylor death, the key to the fridge on Ward 4 in the children's ward had gone missing. The last person to have had it was Beverly Allitt. Now, the significance of this key is that it opens the fridge where the insulin's kept. When she was asked about it, she said that she'd given it to another nurse, but she couldn't remember who. And despite that, no internal inquiry was ever conducted.
Paul Crampton's blood has massive levels of a drug that shouldn't have been administered. Doctors are baffled by the results. A key to the drugs cabinet is missing, and the vital letter written for management has only just been received, more than a week late. The devastating facts make for a shocking read. The hospital now decide to involve the police.
I got called to Grantham Hospital to speak to some senior managers and doctors. It was apparent that we were dealing with something major, with a large number of events which needed urgent attention, urgent action. We had to move quickly because these incidents were still ongoing.
Now, at that meeting, there were the two local paediatricians, Porter and Nanyakara, who were almost diametrically opposed to each other. Porter was saying that he felt that there were 13 or 14 children on that ward whose collapses were unexplained. And Nanyakara, on the other hand, took the opposite view, that although they were unexplained, they were probably due to natural causes. However, they did agree that one particular child, a child called Paul Crampton, could not be very easily explained. In those early stages, nobody knew who was responsible, nobody really knew what had happened. You sit in a meeting like that wondering how you're going to cope with this, because there's obviously going to be a need to trawl through many medical records and have some understanding of medicine and procedures. And in those early stages, I suppose it's fair to say that there is an element of fear in when you realise what it is that you're going to take on.
Detective Superintendent Clifton needs a medical expert to study each case. Officers have to see if there are grounds to dig deeper. Have these children been murdered? The findings come as a surprise to some.
David Hull was asked by me to be my expert, to look at the case files of the children and to provide for me a report which would either suggest that a crime had been committed or that these collapses were something that was a natural occurrence. But his report into the 13 cases that he'd looked at suggested that of the 13, 10 were natural causes, 2 others were unexplained and worthy of further investigation, but would probably be down to natural causes. And 1 child, there was no clinical explanation and was worthy of further investigations.
That 1 child is Paul Crampton, now safe and well at home. But his blood test could hold the key to unravelling the deaths on Ward 4.
There were over 40,000 milliunits per litre of insulin in this child's blood, and in fact I think it's the second highest ever recorded in the world, or it certainly was in 1991.
The police officer from Grantham Police Station came into my office with a lady, and he said that she was a representative of Grantham Hospital, and then he told me that he had reason to believe that Paul's illness was a result of the maladministration of drugs. And I remember precisely what I said. That would explain a lot, wouldn't it?
So for the very first time, now this is 10 or 12 days into the inquiry, we have some evidence that somebody has poisoned one of the children using insulin. Fortunately, the doctor who admitted Becky took blood. And again, we managed to trace that blood and have it examined. And that was found to contain almost 10,000 milliunits per litre of insulin. So here was a second child that we could actually show had been poisoned with insulin.
Blood samples are now showing massive levels of insulin. Have some of the children been poisoned? This is now a major investigation. Everyone involved is questioned.
My role at the time was to go with other officers to Ward 4 at Grantham Hospital to speak to nurses, doctors, parents of the children at the hospital, anyone really, because we were in the process at that stage of gathering as much information as we could to try and establish what had happened and if indeed any criminal offences had occurred.
At the same time, one of the PCs working within the incident room was plotting who was on duty or who was available on the ward at the time of each of these collapses.
An event, who the patient was, what date the event occurred on, who was the nurse involved in any treatment, were any injections given, and if so, by whom. And as a consequence of that, it became apparent that one nurse stuck out as being there when these incidents either occurred or immediately that the child collapsed.
Okay.
4 children have died and 9 collapsed on Ward 4. It all started 10 weeks ago. What began as unavoidable tragedies have now turned into something much more sinister. Police have been in a race against time. After weeks of detective work, they now have their culprit.
The turning point and the shock of the news that the cause of some of the collapses was someone had been harming children became apparent around 4 weeks or 5 weeks later, when the police felt that insulin had been administered to Paul Crampton, very likely by one of the nurses in the ward. And that was a great shock.
My first reaction was a bit of relief because, I was frightened that we'd got a son that had got a medical problem. That was something that was going to affect the rest of his life. Of course, then there's another problem to deal with, that you now realise someone's been trying to harm your child.
Strangely, as police investigate Ward 4, the attacks stop. And after a few weeks, all the evidence leads to one person.
The chart showed that on every occasion that there was a child collapsing, Allitt was on duty.
It didn't specifically identify individual children that she dealt with, but it just showed what happened on the dates and times that she was involved in holding the fridge key, for instance.
So 3 weeks into the inquiry, I decided that I would have Beverly Allitt arrested.
As 23-year-old Beverly Allitt becomes the main suspect, she shows little emotion. 4 children now lie dead and a further 9 seriously injured.
She showed no emotion whatsoever. She certainly didn't appear to be worried, nervous, anxious, agitated, nothing. She gave absolutely nothing away in the course of the interviews and gave me nothing at that stage to suspect that she'd committed any of these offences.
During those 2 days of interviews, she answered questions but distanced herself from the events, often saying, I wasn't there then, I wasn't even on duty when that one happened.
Beverly Allitt's arrest is greeted with mixed emotion. To some parents and staff, she appears to be the model nurse. But police are piecing together another side to this mild-mannered carer. For Stuart Clifton and his team, the evidence is mounting. The finger points to her. They just have to prove it.
The twin sister of Becky Phillips suffered squeeze injuries, had broken ribs that had been missed by the local radiographers, but Philip Small, the consultant radiographer at Queen's, managed to pick it up. Another child, Kaylee Desmond, air had been injected under the arm, which showed on one of the x-rays, which was picked up. So there were a variety of things that were being done to these children.
As the case against Allitt gathers pace, police search the family home and find some telling clues.
There was a hypodermic syringe, there was a hospital pillowcase, and there was a children's exercise book with the words allocations book on the outside. I think it's fair to say that at the time of the arrest, none of us realised the significance of this particular book.
But despite these signs, police have to release Allitt without charge. She can no longer work at the hospital, but is free.
When we looked at this allocations book, what it actually was a rough notebook that was kept by the ward sister. And in it, she wrote down the children who needed care or special care and the nurse that was allocated their care.
She was either attending to, injecting, finding the collapse of the incident with the child concerned. It was basically impossible for it to be anybody else.
The details in this book could now be a vital part of the investigation, and other evidence of samples and x-rays are now coming to the fore. Police are in a race against time. They must build a strong case against Allitt before she strikes again.
We think by this time that we're building quite a reasonable case against Beverly Allitt, except you have to remember that we've still got David Hull's initial report that says that of the kids that he's looked at, 10 of them at least are natural causes and probably some of the others as well. He agreed to take away all of the evidence that we'd collected in statement form and compare it with the medical notes, the doctors and nursing notes, and re-examine and come up with a new conclusion about the collapse of the children. And that had some difficulties in the sense that we were still collecting bits of evidence, so he was being bombarded with bits as we went along. And it wasn't until November of 1991, some 5 months or so later, that he was in a position to say that each and every one of these collapses is unnatural.
Months of frustration for the police finally end with a result. 6 months on, Beverly Allitt is arrested once more, never to step out of custody again.
That arrest was peculiar in the sense that she was charged, went to the cell, immediately fell asleep and had to be woken the next morning, which I found rather astonishing for somebody that was going to face some horrendous charges in court the following day.
It was absolutely nothing to her, no emotion whatsoever, no fear, no anxiety, nothing. One of the times that she was at the police station, I actually went and saw her in the cell, and she'd lifted her top because she'd lost quite a lot of weight, and she was sort of saying, "Oh, look, I've lost weight, do you think I look better?" and all this, as if we were long lost friends.
And elements of Beverly Allitt's true nature and personality now start to filter through.
And her medical background, even going back to the days of school, were of a child that came with plasters and bandages and slings and things that normal kids just wouldn't. She complained that she couldn't pass water, and she was admitted to the hospital at Peterborough. It was clear that she had urine retention and that she had a temperature. What concerned the staff at Peterborough Hospital was that her pulse didn't rise when she had a temperature. And eventually they concluded that what she was actually doing was warming up the thermometer. When she complained of pain in the breasts, they examined her quite closely and found needle tracks and concluded that she was actually injecting her own breasts with water. While she'd been on police bail, she'd been living with a family called Jobson down at Peterborough. And Beverly struck up quite a nice relationship with Jonathan Jobson. One particular day they were going off to the market, and before they went, Beverly made Jonathan a drink of squash. When he got to market, he complained of feeling quite ill and collapsed. He was taken into Peterborough Hospital, where it was concluded that he had a high insulin count. There's a whole host of lies and manipulation of people.
Beverly Allitt's trial is long and complicated. Eventually, after months of evidence, she is charged with 4 counts of murder and 9 attempted murders for attacking the children on Ward 4. She is given 13 life sentences and shows no emotion and no remorse.
I saw her at Rampton Hospital about 3 or 4 weeks after her transfer there. At that time, she made admissions in respect to 9 of the 13 that she'd been convicted of. She wouldn't admit that she'd been in involved in any way with the two Phillips children, but undoubtedly she was. Some of them will never know precisely what she did.
This admission of guilt is a small window into Allitt's psyche, but she was never to speak of the attacks again.
I don't want to talk about it.
Why she opened up, we will never know. And as for the motive...
Post-conviction, there were reports from a number of people that suggested that she was suffering from Munchausen syndrome. Now, Munchausen syndrome is a syndrome where people like to get attention. In other words, they're attention seekers and they'll do anything to gain attention. When it moves on and you cause injury to somebody so that you get attention as the carer, it becomes Munchausen syndrome by proxy.
I think it is very unfair for anyone to label her as suffering from Munchausen syndrome, because that virtually minimizes her horrendous criminal actions she carried out as criminal who is cold-blooded, calculating, deceptive, manipulative, and deadly.
Beverly Allitt's case was the first in the UK where a nurse was linked to killing due to Munchausen's by proxy. Whether this is partly the reason, the fallout from this horrific crime is clear. Shortly after news broke, the hospital, its staff and patients became victims of the fallout. Ward 4 was quickly closed, facilities moved to a nearby hospital, and the two main consultants made redundant.
When they found that Beverly Allitt could be charged with these allegations, they wanted to hand over the paediatric services to Queen's Medical Centre.
They closed down Ward 4 at the hospital and removed all the services to Nottingham. I think that was an overreaction, but that was the decision of the regional medical authorities. I think it did a disservice to the people of Grantham.
The Clothier report shortly followed. An inquiry into how and why this tragedy occurred and whether it could have been prevented.
We did not and could not believe that we could have a criminal amongst us, masquerading as a healthcare professional. So my message is, think of the unthinkable. He made about 7 or 8 recommendations out of the total 13 recommendations on recruitment and selection process of nursing. I sincerely believe it should not only apply to nurses, it should apply to all healthcare professionals.
Within this inquiry, the reason that people were never sure whether there were crimes committed was because all of the notes that were made up, and there were countless. There were nursing notes, there were doctors' notes, there were notes from physiotherapists and what have you, were always based on what Beverly Allitt told them.
Beverly Allitt callously murdered those who needed her care. Sadly, 4 children needlessly lost their lives. The 9 who survived have thankfully recovered. Paul Crampton and Michael Davidson had no lasting side effects. Allitt felt no remorse or shame for her victims and thrived on the attention of those who trusted her the most, parents and colleagues. She played them so well, they never suspected her sinister intentions. Which begs the question, could this happen again?
All you can hope to do is to identify the people that have the potential for doing this sort of thing.
In various guises, there are Beverly Allitts all over the place. There needs to be much more rigid vetting procedures of staff entering into the service, and much more rigorous and careful monitoring of staff who are actually on the job. I accept that isn't going to stop every case. You're never ever going to do that if somebody is determined enough to ever try at it. But at least every one case that is prevented is one case that we can be thankful for.
If we remove Beverly Allitt from the picture and consider this to be some new bug, some new superbug, some kind of faulty drug, a batch of drugs that have been badly prepared, the results would have been the same. It's about the hospital's ability to deal with a developing crisis. And the well-meaning medical staff were not prepared to deal with that. That wasn't part of their training. They deal with ill people, not a pattern of unusual circumstances, which in this case was caused by Beverly Allitt.
I was satisfied that Miss Allitt would be convicted on the basis of the evidence. The fact that she still remains in prison, I think, is fair.
She has committed atrocious crimes on most vulnerable and helpless children. I believe she is nothing but a cold-blooded murderer. I sincerely hope and wish that I know any health professional will ever come across anybody like Beverly Allitt ever in their life.
And there's one thing I am very certain of, is Beverly Allitt should never be free.
August 19th, 1987. A lone gunman, Michael Ryan, took to the streets of Hungerford in Berkshire with an armoury of weapons. In the space of 1 hour, he fired over 119 shots, killing 16 people and injuring a further 15. That one man's actions changed the lives of the people at the centre of the killing spree. His devastation to their lives took less than an hour and stayed with them for a lifetime. It was a crime that changed Britain.
I could hear gunfire, and that's not, you know, that's quite usual around here, but I knew it was the wrong type of gunfire. I knew something was wrong.
Among those killed were passers-by and a policeman who tried to reason with him.
Just said to Mum, "Oh my God, I've been shot," to which her response was, "Don't be stupid." And with that, he just opened fire on Mum's side of the car.
Many people knew the gunman, a local man in his mid-20s who collected weapons.
It's somebody that's been living within the community and somebody that would certainly have known quite a lot of his victims by sight, if not by name.
Ambulance crews had come under fire as they attempted to tend for the wounded.
You have people saying, my daughter or my son's up there and why aren't you doing anything? And people were shouting at you, but you couldn't actually put the crews at risk.
A heavily armed man walking through this quiet country town, shooting people apparently at random.
It's just going to alter everybody's perspective of life, full stop.
Michael Ryan was a 27-year-old who lived with his mum in Hungerford. His father had passed away 2 years previously. Ryan was a quiet man who kept himself to himself. He shunned socialising, instead dedicating time to his one passion, guns, spending hours down at the shooting range.
He'd never come to police notice, he wasn't known to us, and he wasn't known, in all fairness, to many people in Hungerford.
I know he had lots of different jobs and things, because my grandmother, who lived in the same road, used to gossip about everybody that lived in the street, and that was sort of coming across in conversation, you know, the things that his mother had said about him, but nothing at all to indicate anything sort of sinister really was going on.
And I don't think anybody could sort of quite believe that it was Michael Ryan, because a lot of the other people injured did come from Southview and they were his neighbours.
In the ambulance service, we took his father to the day centre on a regular basis. And the only time that I actually came across Michael Ryan was when we used to take him home. And sometimes he used to be sort of standing in the doorway.
You'd only see him if he was walking his dog or he was doing something for his mum's car, and that was it. Never see him any other time.
This film will tell the story of the Hungerford Massacre through the eyewitness accounts of 4 people at the centre of the tragedy. Alison Chapman was a 16-year-old living in the next road up from Michael Ryan. A resident in Hungerford all her life, she knew the area well. Alison was getting ready to return to work after having lunch at home with her mum.
Yeah, well, it was a sunny day in August, school holidays. I just finished school because I was 16 at the time. I'd come back from work in the morning and I was just at home with Mum. We were having lunch.
What time do you finish today?
Not late, I hope.
Carl Harris was a 21-year-old soldier on leave from the army at his parents' house across town. His family moved to Hungerford just 5 years previously.
The day started when I was out with my little brother fixing my car. I was due to go back to the army in the next couple of days, and I had to do some repairs on it.
Sylvia Pascoe lived a few doors up from Michael Ryan in Southview with her husband and 2 children. She had been his neighbour for 10 years. That day, she'd risen early to do the housework before going to meet her sister.
The 19th of August was a nice sunny day, and getting up, doing my job, so I'd organised to go and meet my sister, so needed to get the house spick and span, and I was in my night dress and dressing gown. My children were outside playing with the next door neighbours' kids, and it was just an everyday event, really.
Sarah Britton had been a nurse for 12 years. Just 3 days before, she had swapped her nursing duties for a managerial role and was still finding her feet at a new hospital, the Princess Margaret, 47 miles away in Windsor.
I'd been employed as a service manager for the medical wards, and on getting up, I put on an outfit because I was still obviously out trying to impress, and I had a really busy day. The programme was sort of preset for me, and I remember, I think, just grabbing a sandwich for lunch.
As the residents of Hungerford settle into their daily business, police in the adjoining town of Newbury are getting confused reports of an attempted armed robbery at a petrol station down the road. These calls to the police are the first indications of a gunman on the loose. In Savernake Forest, 10 miles from Hungerford, Michael Ryan marches Sue Godfrey away from her small children and shoots her 13 times. He has just claimed his first victim. He then drives to the petrol station en route to Hungerford, firing at an attendant. And now he's heading straight towards Alison Chapman and her mum. Michael Ryan has returned to Southview and set the family home on fire with the petrol he has just bought. When he returns to his car and it fails to start, he reaches breaking point. He shoots his dog. Then turns the gun on his neighbours, killing Roland and Sheila Mason and injuring Marjorie Jackson and Lisa Mildenhall.
Our house backed onto what is the primary school in Hungerford, and they were doing maintenance work, so there were scaffolders and builders, and we just heard what was like scaffolding poles being dropped.
Did you hear that noise?
Probably kids playing, don't worry.
They'll make the horses skittish. Can we go check on them?
They'll be fine. Come on, let's get you to work.
See, they're really loud. I'm sure they're coming from near Southview.
So we thought, oh, Mum would drop me off at work, but we'll go via that way just to check that she's all right, not running around the field and hurting herself. We turned down the bottom of Clark's Gardens, which is where we lived. It's a short drive, probably about 30 seconds, not very far at all.
As Alison and her mum head towards Southview, over at the hospital, Sarah Britton is receiving sketchy reports of a serious incident unfolding in Hungerford.
The gentleman that came in was the Deputy Unit General Manager. He stood in the doorway. He certainly had an air about him, sort of, that he needed my attention fairly quickly, and that he just generally stated that we were going together around to the A&E department, and he was out of the door virtually as he sort of finished that sentence. The major incident plan had been activated.
Doctors, nurses, could I have your attention, please?
It wasn't until we were actually in the department that he briefed all the staff to say that there had been an incident at Hungerford.
Meanwhile, a concerned Alison and her mum are almost at Southview.
Because I was working in a sandwich packing company, it was a holiday job, I'd learnt to pack tuna and onion sandwiches, and we'd had them for lunch, and we were talking about that. In front of us was a police car which was parked on the right-hand side. It was parked half up the bank, so it just looked like it had parked there out the way for passing traffic. In front of the car, our car, Michael Ryan was stood with the gun across his chest. He was in camouflage from head to toe. He just glanced towards the car, and then before me and Mum could really say an awful lot to each other, he just opened fire on the car.
Michael Ryan is at Southview, Hungerford. He has sparked a police emergency after shooting dead a woman in Savernake Forest and attempting to murder a cashier at a petrol station. 2 neighbours have now also been shot dead as he walks up the street and fires at Ken Clements, walking his dog near the common, and PC Roger Brereton, the first police officer to attend the scene. He has now killed 5 people and injured 2 more. Alison Chapman and her mum have come to investigate the noises, mistaking the gunshots for scaffolding poles being dropped.
What's the police car doing there? What's going on? He's gonna shoot us!
He was holding a gun across his chest. He was very stubbly, sort of unshaven, and he just looked really like, I don't know what the word is, not sort of brain dead, that's a bit exaggeration, but just really not quite there. He opened fire my side first. I remember putting my leg down and pulling it up and just said to Mum, "Oh my God, I've been shot," to which her response was, "Don't be stupid." And with that, he just opened fire on Mum's side of the car. When I glanced to her, and she's quite small, and her head was like twice the size of its normal size. She looked like she'd been pepper sprayed with blood. She had a cut to her neck and a cut right over her shoulder and was just pouring with blood. Then it went quiet. He'd obviously run out of bullets. And Mum just sort of put the car in reverse. Don't know how she managed to, and she just reversed back down Southview.
Across town, 21-year-old soldier Carl Harris has immediately been alerted by the noise. As a lance corporal in the army, he is all too aware of the distinct sound of firearms.
What was that? Sounded like gunshots, proper gunshots. I'm gonna go and take a look.
I had to go and get a part from a shop down in town. Just before I left, I could hear gunfire, and that's not, that's quite usual around here. But I knew it was the wrong type of gunfire. I knew something was wrong, and I headed off down into the high street to basically see what was going on. And as I walked down the hill into the high street, somebody said that there was somebody out and they were shooting people.
It's now 1:20 p.m. and Carl, concerned that the gunshots are something sinister, hurries towards the high street to investigate. Remarkably, after both being shot by Michael Ryan, Alison Chapman and her mum are managing to drive to the doctor's clinic, almost a mile away.
I had wellies on because we were going up the field, and I could feel the blood running down my leg, and it was all going through my toes and all squelchy. And I didn't really know what to do with this piece of flesh on my hand, so I just sat there with it on my hand, and as if to say, well, what do I do with it? I didn't really think about myself at all, I don't think, at that time. I was only 16, it was all a bit surreal. I was much more concerned about my mum and if she was okay. I mean, I'd looked at her and just, I think that was one of the most awful things I ever saw as a 16-year-old child, to see your mum in that state. It just got me, and it's really emotional for me now. I don't think anybody really any further was aware what was going on because we drove right across the high street.
In fact, a lot of people in town that day were completely unaware Michael Ryan was roaming the streets with his guns.
There were roadblocks on, and quite clearly every effort was being made to keep the general public away from where the scene. It transpired this gunman was on the loose.
It was amazing, really, because I was running down the street and people were just going about their daily business.
Even at the time, there was one of my friends was walking back to work, and I was like, well, what are you doing? Is there a gunman around? They didn't even know. They didn't have a clue what was going on. He said, oh, I only walked over, thought it was a traffic accident.
People were still about, but they were being cleared out, so there was been a sterile area made around the town centre. But there were still some people about.
Michael Ryan continues to roam the quiet streets as shoppers in the high street less than 900 yards away are oblivious to his actions. Walking down the road, he kills another neighbour, Abdur Khan. Ryan's mother, Dorothy, just returning home, tries to reason with him in the chaos. He kills her. He is now heading to the Memorial Gardens. 8 people are lying dead, with 8 more seriously wounded.
As we turned down into the croft, Mum said, where shall I park the car? When I was 16 at the time, and I don't swear very often, and I certainly didn't back then, but my response was something like, just bloody stop the car. With that, we then crashed into the verge outside the doctor's surgery, which is there's a big tree. The brakes had gone on the car, so we just sort of came into land. One of the nurses then came out with the doctor, and that she helped me into the surgery with sort of, I had my arm around her and we sort of limped in. But so I was taken into a different room then and just kept with the nurse, she was rubbing my leg constantly, obviously trying to keep the circulation going, and I was asking her questions like, how big's the hole? Because obviously it's in the bottom of my thigh and I couldn't see it, and she was sort of saying, well, that's sort of like saucer size, you know, and not to worry, we'll get you sorted out.
Okay.
As word gradually spreads of the danger in Hungerford, over at the hospital in Windsor, Sarah Britton and her colleagues are starting to receive the first casualties.
I very quickly gave a brief summary of my sort of immediate sort of past experience so that my colleagues had some idea of what my level of professional sort of capability and skills were at that time.
The exit wound is always much larger than the entry wound, so when you're assessing your patients, you need to look for a large exit wound. If there's anything
By then, the first ambulance, you could hear the ambulance actually approaching the hospital. Doors were opening, more people were coming into the department, remembering that we were having to get patients who were already in the department out and clearing cubicles, etc. There wasn't time to think, it was just automatic mode and get on with the job. All we knew that there was an incident in Hungerford, and then somebody, I think, actually said there had been a shooting. But I think we probably all thought at that stage that it was just 1 or 2. Nobody had any understanding of the number of casualties that were about to come through the door.
As Sarah is tending to the patients, Alison and her mum are rushed to the Princess Margaret Hospital. Her mum has lost a lot of blood, and doctors are about to discover the severity of Alison's injuries.
I was taken out on a stretcher, and I was taken actually and just examined and had some x-rays. They just had a quick look and they actually stitched me up, put me in a side room and said that I could go home.
As Alison tries to cope with her injuries, her family are desperately trying to find out what has happened.
First I knew was my dad called, and he was terribly upset, and never really heard my dad upset particularly, and said that my sister and mum had been in a car accident. And I sort of realised straight away that he wasn't sort of coming forward with what was necessarily the whole story. I remember it being chaotic when we got down there. I remember being dropped off at the front of the hospital and trying to go into reception and find out what was happening.
Don't worry.
I think the first person that came in and told me anything was Dad, before any of the doctors turned up, and I just remember him breaking down and being really, really absolutely floored, and never seeing him like that, and then realising that it was a lot worse than I'd imagined, really.
Meanwhile, back in Hungerford, Ryan remains unchallenged as the police hunt continues. He's now moved on to kill Francis Butler in the Memorial Gardens, then calmly walked the streets, killing Marcus Barnard, Douglas Wainwright and Eric Vardy, and injuring a further 4. The death toll is now 12, with 12 severely injured. Carl Harris, oblivious to all of this, is about to discover the enormity of what is unfolding.
So I just wandered up there, you know, to see what was going on. And it wasn't until I actually, I can't remember the name of the road, went up the little cut and walked round to the top that I actually saw him stood there, that I realised something was wrong. It wasn't until he actually started opening fire that I thought, basically thought, well, this is not good.
In the last 45 minutes, 12 people have been shot dead and 12 injured as Michael Ryan roams the streets of Hungerford. As police hurry to stop any further bloodshed, Carl Harris has just caught Ryan's attention on the corner of Priory Road. They now stand face to face.
I don't think he saw me first of all, and I carried on up. He then just turned around and looked straight at me. Here, I do believe this house here at the time had a high hedge. I don't remember it, but I found myself in the garden, but somebody afterwards told me that I'd actually dived through the hedge and just waiting there. I could hear gunshots, but I didn't know whether I was hit. What's it like to be hit? Does it hurt? So I'm obviously feeling myself.
As Carl takes cover, police are still struggling to locate Ryan's whereabouts, largely due to hampered communications. To add to this, their usually swift firearms department are on a training exercise over 50 minutes away, making a quick response difficult. The Ryan family home in Southview is now blazing uncontrollably. Fire crews aren't allowed to get through until it is safe to do so. And as the fire destroys adjoining homes, just a few doors up, Sylvia Pascoe, a neighbour of Ryan's for 10 years, is trying to save the life of a 14-year-old girl.
Suddenly I heard breaking of glass and sort of stopped for a few seconds. My son came running in to get me because I'm in St John's ambulance, so his first port of call was, I'll get Mum. So I dropped everything, wasn't dressed, went round with him and went into my next door neighbour's kitchen to find the young girl that was standing there saying, I've been shot. I thought, delirious, doesn't happen. And she was worried about her trousers. They were her sister's and they were yellow, but they'd started to turn pink. And my first reaction was, I need to find out what your injuries are. I'll lay you down because you're going to fall down. I could see that there was a nasty gash in the top of her leg on the right, and there was blood pouring from this, and I thought to myself, well, I need to stop it. And I had a neighbour there who said that I'll get whatever you need.
I sent Robert.
And we grabbed towels, etc.
I don't know whether this will help.
And we put the leg on a flower pot to raise it. In the background we could hear what I would call firecrackers. And it still didn't sink in, because my main concern was, stopping this bleeding and making sure she wasn't going to go unconscious. I stayed by her side, on my knees, with the only way I can describe it is one hand supporting the bottom of the leg and then one over the top, with all these towels on top and just pressing down for direct pressure. We don't use tourniquets, and going through my mind was, what can I do if this doesn't work?
As Sylvia desperately tries to save Michael Ryan's youngest victim, the gunman is still at large. His route has steered clear of the main high street. Although police blocks now stop people entering the town, a lot of residents there are still unaware of the tragedy. Michael Ryan has made his way from Southview to Fairview Road, then back up Southview, across the playing field to Clark's Gardens. He has then walked over through the Memorial Gardens to Priory Avenue and Terrace Hill, randomly firing at people as he goes.
Well, it was some time before the firearms officers could actually get into the scene, because we didn't know it. We were getting reports of shots being fired, there were reports of people having been shot. Some people were injured, we knew that. The telephone system was just incapable of taking all the emergency calls that were coming in. So it was very difficult to piece it all together. But yes, we got an idea of the route Ryan was taking up through the playing fields towards the school.
Michael Ryan is now on Priory Road after taking aim at Carl Harris.
And then there was a change in the tone of the shots, and I recognised that as being a pistol, and then it all went completely deadly quiet. And as I came round the corner, I could see that Michael Ryan had gone up the road, so I was pretty confident where I knew he was. And as I came round the corner here, there was this red Renault 5, I believe it was, and it was literally just rolling down the road here. I started walking up, and I remember somebody looking at the car and then started shouting, "She's been shot, she's been shot." So I chased after it, and I think it was around about here that I managed to catch up with the car. As I pulled her up and got the door open, somebody appeared, and I assumed at the time he came from one of these houses here. He said to me at the time that he was a off-duty ambulanceman, and he gave me a hand to carry her, and we carried her across to the grass. I do believe it was just here, and the ambulance came, and they basically took the girl away. And then I remember I just sat on the grass. Bless her, there was this little old lady, and she gave me one of these sort of like, you know, these cheap car plastic boxed type first aid kits, which really are no good for, you know, really anything other than a cut finger. And she said, "Oh, this will help," you know, and I said, "Oh, thanks very much."
As Ryan kills his 13th victim, 22-year-old Sandra Hill, this is now the biggest single massacre in the UK. 13 people are dead and a further 12 injured. As ambulance crews wait in the high street, they are desperate to reach the casualties, but like the police and fire crew, are restricted because of the danger. No one knows where the gunman is.
In the initial stages, one of our ambulances was shot at, and luckily the crew did get away, and we didn't want the same thing to happen again. It was immense pressure because you had people saying, my daughter or my son's up there and why aren't you doing anything? And people were shouting at you, but you couldn't actually put the crews at risk. You had the crews, in any of our jobs that we do, we have to put the crews' safety first.
Despite the potential risk, brave paramedics are gradually getting to the victims. Then making the 50-minute journey to the hospital where Sarah Britton is trying to cope with the rising number of casualties.
There seemed to be more and more people coming, sort of every time I sort of, looked up again around the sort of main departments. And I think at that stage, I was just looking, where is the drugs cupboard? Where is, where are the bandages kept? Where do I find equipment? I was literally just sort of being another nurse, if you like, a member of the team, an additional pair of hands. You expect sort of perhaps one or two, but when you start getting into double figures, I remember thinking, when is it going to stop?
Back in Hungerford, as Michael Ryan makes his way up Priory Road, police are calling in more backup, and ambulance crews are anxiously waiting for clearance.
It was important to get people out of the situation, as many as we could, but at the same time you've also got the problem of the person running around with the gun, and you don't know where he is, so therefore you don't want to send the ambulances up into a danger area. And they would be detailed to go to Priory Road. Another one would be detailed to go to Terence Hill, and it was sort of one ambulance to one section, as it were.
Over in Southview, as paramedics manage to reach Sylvia and Lisa Mildenhall, she has been shot 4 times and is losing a lot of blood. As they tend to her severe injuries, Sylvia is left to seek refuge at her neighbours.
Both myself and the neighbour, we were sort of just stood there, and we just sort of looked at each other, and we went to number 11. Nobody had told us who it was that had the gun at that time. I mean, because we had no radio on, no television on. We were sitting in the bedroom and we were sort of talking. I remember one of the kids dropped the loo seat and we all jumped. And then suddenly we looked out the bedroom window and there was these police in the school field with riot gear on. And they shouted and they said, "Right, when I tell you to run, I want you to come to the front door and I want you to run. I don't want you to stop. I want you to carry on down the road and I want you to run."
As Sylvia remains unaware that Michael Ryan has killed 13 people and injured 12, including Lisa, Carl Harries, who has already come face to face with the gunman, hasn't turned on his heel. Instead, He's now running towards Michael Ryan, trying to save others.
I was very dubious about going around the bend, because you go around the bend and the road is dead straight all the way up. And I thought, if I go around there, he can see me, then help, I made the decision that, there's people up there that need help, I'm going to go up there. So on the left-hand side, there's a whole row of cars, and I sort of worked my way up, keeping low between the cars and the wall. And then I stopped, and I just didn't feel something. I felt something's not right. And I had a sort of quick look over the car, and he was actually come back, and it was actually just the other side of the car. And at that point, I was like, I'm getting under this car. I don't know, it was quite eerie because you could see his foot, you could see his feet. It was a silly little things like, oh, my feet in. Have I got all my hands in? Is my feet in? Is he going to walk around and find my foot?
Michael Ryan is roaming the streets of his hometown, killing at random. In 55 minutes, he has killed 13 people and injured 12. He remains unchallenged. As police scramble to pinpoint his whereabouts, brave soldier Carl Harries remains undeterred by the danger and tries to save people in Ryan's wake.
I felt something's not right. And I had a sort of quick look over the car, and he was actually come back, and it was actually just the other side of the car. At that stage, I decided to get underneath the car. I don't know, it was quite eerie because you could see his foot, you could see his feet, and he would walk, stop, walk back again, and then he walked off. All I could hear was a woman screaming, absolutely screaming her head off. And at the time I was thinking, that's good, because if she's screaming, she's alive. And I remember being crouched down, I remember looking up and I could see the car. I remember sprinting across to here, and I think the car that had been crashed was round about where the bins are now. So I literally stayed down, and then made my way up towards the cars. When I got to the car, I realised that a shot had gone through the windscreen. And I later found out that they'd been actually driving down the road where he'd fired at them. And it was the driver that had been hit. The person screaming was his wife next to him. And he'd been shot in the neck. The lady goes to me, I'm a nurse. And I said to her, well, stop bloody screaming and give me a hand. Get out of the bloody car and give me a hand. And again, an ambulance appeared.
Please. Is he going to be all right, Ian?
Look, can I leave him with you now? OK.
Meanwhile at the hospital, Sarah Britton's job is getting harder by the minute. What was 1 or 2 casualties is now many, many more. Calls from frantic loved ones are also swamping their systems, and Sarah is juggling her time between urgent nursing duties and dealing with inquiries. As more patients come through, Alison's mum is rushed to intensive care with serious throat injuries, and Alison's leg injuries are baffling doctors.
Try and relax your leg a bit.
I was taken out on a stretcher, and I was taken actually and just examined and had some x-rays. They just had a quick look and they actually stitched me up, put me in the side room and said that I could go home.
When we first went to see Ali, it was quite a positive story really, because they'd sort of finished sort of cleaning her up and doing all the checks, and sort of I think probably were in the process of stitching her up, and I remember she'd had some injections, I believe. And at that point they didn't realise that she still had sort of a bullet in her.
By now, the urgency to contain Michael Ryan is immense. A police speaker system is warning residents from the helicopter above. Firearms officers are now being briefed and sightings are still being reported. But Michael Ryan remains at large. He is on Priory Road after entering the house of Victor and Myrtle Gibbs and shooting them in their kitchen. He then walks next door, shooting Michael Jennings, and across the road, firing at Myra Gita through a front window. 16 people now lie dead and 14 injured. Carl Harries has been chasing Ryan for the past 40 minutes and is still risking his life to try and save the gunman's victims.
This lad came out from about 2 houses away, and he goes, my girlfriend's been shot. He took me upstairs, and in the front room on the big bed, the girl was lying there, and she had the fashion of the day, the tight jeans and that lot, and you could see an entry wound and a leg. We carried her down the stairs and sat her down and said, in the back room, so let's go to the back of the house, so if anything happens, You can't be seen. Somebody said to me, oh, someone's been shot in that house. And I thought, oh, God, blimey. And here, where this new fence is, there was like fir tree type fence hedge. And I literally went up to the front door, banged on the door, couldn't hear anything. Hello! Lifted the letterbox, and one of those letterboxes has got a flap on the inside as well. So I was lifting up, and as I looked in, I could see a guy sat on the stairs. So I started shouting at him, "You all right, you all right? You know, talk to me, because I've got to get in." And he then sort of brought his head up and looked. He says, "Yeah, I'm okay." I said, "What's happened to you?" Because I've been shot in the leg.
My neighbours.
I said, "Well, I need to get in and see you." And I said, "Watch out, I'll kick the door in." He goes, "No, no, I can make it." And I remember him dragging himself across the floor and leaning up and opening the door. Got in there, picked him up, moved him back to the stairs, and again, he'd been shot in the leg. He shouted back to me and he says, "Can you check my neighbours? Something's happened there." I sort of tunnelled through the hedge and got to the house next door, and I knew it was going to be bad straight away, because they had a whole glass front door and all the glass was shot out.
As Carl rushes to another house, Alison's condition alarmingly deteriorates.
I then had a policeman come in. He wanted to take some statements. He was talking to me quite normally, and he looked down and he just went really pale, and I thought, what's he looking at? He looked down and all the stitches had come apart and my leg was just pouring blood.
And it was almost when they were getting ready to move her to a ward away from the intensive care unit, because obviously other people were coming in that were in a worse state, really, that she collapsed, and then they realised that there was something that was still sort of not very right with her.
It is now 1:45 p.m. Michael Ryan has spent 60 minutes shooting innocent people in a random attack. He has killed 16, including his own mother, and injured 14. The family house is ablaze and has now spread to the adjoining 3 houses. Now he walks up Priory Road to his old school, shooting George Noon in his porch, as police start to close the net, and Carl Harris has just reached the home of Victor and Myrtle Gibbs.
This is the one stage I remember being extremely nervous about, going in. What do I do? I was trying to be, tactical about it, military-wise, and sort of going in carefully, keeping low, and all the sort of things they trained to do. And because I was doing that, I didn't realise there was a big, massive pile of glass, and I started walking on the glass. And it made an awful noise, or it felt like an awful noise. And then I heard a noise response, and I thought, oh, God. I just stood there. And then that noise, I could suddenly hear was a woman's voice. And she was like, "Help me, please help me. My husband, please help me." Dead quiet. I thought, if he's in the house, he must have heard that. He will respond. I'll hear movement from somewhere. And the stairs is to my right. I was just literally just staring at the stairs, in case he came down. And nothing happened. So I started making my way into the kitchen. And to my right, on the back, there was like a kitchen back door, and there was this old lady that was sort of like curled around the door, with her back to the door, and her husband laid on top of her. And it was sad, because straight away you could see her husband was trying to protect her. And she goes, my husband, is he dead?" And I said, "No, of course he's not dead. Don't be silly. He's all right. Let's worry about you." And I remember lifting him up and pulling him off of her, and she had been shot. I remember having this plastic first aid kit, and I just looked at it, opened it, and went, "That is just so no good." I thought, I need more kit. Basically, I need more kit. I was going to run back across the road to where the girl had been shot before and ask them if they had a first aid kit. And as I came out, I thought, "No, sod it, I'm going for it," and just going to run straight across the road. As I came out of the house, I looked up this road, obviously, and I looked left before I ran across, and right at the bottom of the road there was an ambulance. So I'm stood there like a madman, waving. It suddenly dawns on me then, like, you're facing down the road, waving like a madman, and he's behind you somewhere. So it was sort of like back into the side and feebly. They'd already spotted us and they flashed the lights.
Carl helps the paramedics with 4 of Michael Ryan's victims. Over 3 hours later, he heads up to the school. It is now 5:26 p.m.
And eventually got round the corner to the school, and there was a policeman stood there, a single policeman. And he's like, "Who are you?" I says, "Well, I've been treating people back there. I've come round." So, "Don't worry," he says, "we've got them cornered in the school. It's all under control."
The firearms team surrounded the school, and in fact, one of the firearms officers actually then spoke to Ryan, trying to get him to give himself up. The firearms team at that stage wouldn't have known exactly how many people he had shot, but they'd certainly be aware that he had killed more than one person, and that there was every likelihood that he would try and shoot somebody else.
I looked and said, "You're telling me it's all under control, 100% under control?" He goes, "Yeah, we're all sorted." "You sure?" And he goes, "Yeah, yeah." I said, "Fine, that'll do me." Turned around and I walked back.
And then somebody came up the road and said to me, "Sorry, Carl's in the high street, he's all covered in blood." I thought perhaps he's just wounded, or perhaps I can get there and save him.
As dusk settles on Hungerford, the gunfire has ceased. Carl Harries is now safely with his father. Sylvia Pascoe is in the shelter of an old people's home after being ordered to run down Southview by police.
Hello, A&E.
Sarah Britton is being inundated at the hospital. Doctors are prepping for surgery after discovering a bullet lodged in Alison's back. And Michael Ryan is surrounded by police at his old secondary school. "You are surrounded by armed police. Do as you're told, and no harm will come to you."
What about my mother? She's dead. I know she's dead.
"I will try to find out about your mother, Mr. Ryan."
I've picked up my gun again. If only the police car hadn't turned up, if only my car had started. I'm not coming out until I know about my mother.
Mr. Ryan, I'm still trying to find out. If you come down, we'll be able to find out together. At 6:52 p.m, after attempted negotiations for over an hour, police hear a single muffled shot from inside the school. At 8:10 p.m, just over an hour later, they enter to find Michael Ryan dead in classroom 6. The Hungerford Massacre on the 19th of August 1987 will never be forgotten, but for the brave victims, residents and emergency services, they have tried hard to rebuild their lives. Sarah Britton went on to work as a service manager and is still in the health profession.
And there have been other incidents called. Some of them have probably not come to anything, others have. I'm very happy to report that of the incidents I've been involved in, none of them have been related to guns.
Sylvia Pascoe still lives in Southview and works with the St John's ambulance.
He said she lost 3 pints of blood, and if you hadn't done what you did, she'd have died.
Alison Chapman's mum recovered, and despite the bullet still lodged in Alison's back, she was thrilled to give birth.
Just tend to get on with it. I mean, I'm still here. You know, I've got a wonderful husband and a beautiful son, so I'm making the best of what I got.
Carl Harries is now a captain in the British Army. He received a commendation for his bravery.
He handed me a letter and he said, "This is from Buckingham Palace." And you know, I sat there and opened it up and he goes, "What's it say?" He goes, "What's it say?" And I said, "Oh, I've been told that I'm on the honours list and I'm getting the Queen's commendation for bravery."
But I was determined that one person was not going to stop me living in a house that I loved, in a neighbourhood that I loved.
Michael Ryan took just 1 hour to leave a trail of devastation that tragic day. Before this massacre, Hungerford hadn't witnessed a murder for 111 years. With 84 rounds from his AK-47, 34 from a Beretta pistol, and 1 round from his M1 carbine, he shot 31 people, killing 16. before turning a gun on himself.
It's the people who were there, it's their families, the ambulance girls, the policemen watching their colleagues being shot. It's those are the people that really I feel so sorry for.
They classify Michael Ryan as a loner who lived with his mum, but I've got friends and, you know, that are loners and live with their parents. You know, that doesn't make somebody get an armoury of weapons and go out and kill a lot of people. You know, they try and psychoanalyse him, but I always say the only person that could say why he did it isn't here, and that is Michael Ryan.
As a result of the massacre, gun laws in the UK were changed to stop anyone possessing a semi-automatic weapon. Has it made a difference?
I think, yes, the measures that were brought in were as a direct response to public demand and police demand at the time. Why did a person need to possess an AK-47 sort semi-automatic rifle? I can't give a reason for that.
If people want to get their hands on guns, they will, regardless of any gun law in place. I mean, there's, you know, you could probably get one if you went somewhere and spoke to the right people within half an hour, I should think. And it sounds real cliche, it's not the guns that kill people, it's the people behind them.
This could happen in a small town in this country tomorrow. And to be honest with you, I think the people would be better equipped for it, but I don't think the response would be much better at the time because it wouldn't be expected.
Dr. Lin Russell and her two daughters, Josie and Megan, were victims of a vicious hammer attack in 1996. 3 people left for dead in the picturesque countryside of Kent. The brutality of the crime left a community reeling, and the senseless murders stunned the nation, making this a crime that shook Britain.
Kent police described the investigation as one of the most difficult that they'd ever faced.
I can just remember the world sort of coming to an end and we all just standing there and saying, no, you know, this can't be happening.
They were tied up and beaten repeatedly around the head with a hammer.
This kind of pristine place where you once felt really safe, you just didn't anymore.
Police say they have no motive for the violence and few leads to go on.
I knew the moment I saw this policeman coming back into the house, his body language, the look on his face, that something terrible was wrong.
Lin, Megan and Josie Russell were violently attacked by a stranger whilst walking home from school. In an unprovoked and frenzied assault, the girls stood little chance. The killer evaded justice for a year. Eventually, a local psychiatric patient, Michael Stone, was arrested and charged with murder. A small consolation for the family and friends of the girls lost in this tragedy.
I look back at the photographs of all the flowers and the pets and the ponies and the little cottage, and it was a very, very lovely existence. Megan was never quite as outgoing or kind of full of herself as Josie. Josie was in a way, the leader, the oldest child. Megan was quieter, but very determined, just like her mum.
I can just remember 2 very bubbly little girls with a super mum and dad.
Lin would be at home looking after the home and the animals. She did all her own work around the house, whether it was gardening, whether it was decorating, knocking down a wall with a sledgehammer. If she wanted to get something done, she'd do it.
I remember when I used to walk back with Josie and Lin and Megan, I think they were quite laid back and very at one with nature, because I remember we would find things like a bird's egg or something and we'd take it home. Lin would just let us do things like that, and yeah, it was nice just walking home amongst, you know, the fields and things all pretty.
We were very settled. In fact, we were thinking of moving potentially to a larger place, with our own field. We didn't have a field originally in Kent. But it sounds and was quite idyllic.
The attack on the Russells will be told through the eyes of those closest to the tragedy. A beautiful summer's morning in Chillenden, Kent. The Russell family rise and plan for a busy day, juggling work and school activities. They're beginning to find routine after moving to Kent from Wales just months previously.
Although I'd been trying to get a full-time job locally in North Wales, it hadn't worked out. We thought, for the sake of being together for the family, I mean, not having to do this long-distance commuting, we'd up sticks, moved to Kent. Okay, no mountains, but it's a very pretty, it's a beautiful place. There I remember it being very nice to be able to sit even outside in early morning before we went to work or school and have breakfast even on the little patio outside with the cats around and the dogs.
The Russell house winds into action with the usual family breakfast and plans for the day ahead.
That day I took the children into work myself. And that was one of the days in which I did deliver them to school. The thing I can remember about the last few minutes with Lin was it was the normal morning rushing off to school, saying goodbye, the sunlight there and the garden, the flowers, and Lin going off and me thinking, well, she'll be immediately getting stuck into the gardening or the housework.
Sean drives the short journey to the local primary school to drop his two daughters before heading to work.
I've got this vision, this image in my mind of them in their little blue gingham dresses with their satchels. They went to a swimming gala that day, I do remember that. So they may have had a couple of towels there as well, sort of draped over the satchel. So that's the last I saw as they went into school that day, yeah.
As Sean settles into work, Lin tends to chores around the cottage, and Josie and Megan start their daily lessons, unaware that in a few hours' time their lives will change forever.
I was Josie's teacher at Goodnestone Church of England Primary School. She was really bubbly, she was lively, she had lots of interests. A really very highly motivated child.
I first met Josie at school, when we were at school together. She and Megan were, the new children at school, and my friend and I, we kind of befriended her, really. I remember all the children were going to a field to play, and Jasmine, my friend, and I stayed back with Josie, and I think we made like paper necklaces or something like that.
As the school day draws to a close, Sean nips out to the streets of Canterbury to run some errands.
To check on my bicycle, which was being fixed, get some cash, books that the girls had taken out from the Canterbury City Library. I returned them on their behalf.
Meanwhile, Josie and Megan are just finishing a swimming gala as their mother Lin makes the short, picturesque walk through the country lanes to pick them up from school.
I had phoned Lin because she told me they were going to the swimming gala, and that she would then take them to Brownies. Lin was going to take them along and be given a lift by a local friend. So when I did go home about 7 o'clock and they weren't there, I wasn't too worried. I just started making the supper for when they were due to come home.
As Sean prepares the family evening meal, he rationalises why the girls might be late home, until the phone goes.
It was Liz Gregson, and she rang and said that she'd called round at 5 o'clock to take them to Brownies and they weren't there. The house was closed up, there was no sign of them. At that point, I started to become a bit concerned.
For the last half hour, Sean has presumed his family to be at Brownie's, as planned that morning. Now, as evening sets in, he starts to panic.
You have no messages.
I didn't spend long on the phone with Liz. I do remember then starting to just try and work out where they might be.
My mum and I were picking her up and taking her to Brownie's, and there was no one there, and obviously there weren't mobiles at that time. I wasn't too worried at the time, but when I was picked up from Brownie's, Mum said that they still weren't back.
By the time Liz Gregson calls again,
Hello?
Sean is now frantic.
I believe it was around that time, 9 o'clock, that I said, right, actually, I better start making more of an effort to check on what's going on here. And I rang the police station. This is now only 2 hours after the time when we expected that I'd be home and maybe they would be home from Brownie's. Police said no, we've had no reports of accidents. I suddenly thought, well, shall I go and have a look myself? I drove the route along the pathway, the little country lane, between our home and the school that Lin and the girls would walk whenever they walked to and from school.
Girls, are you home? Lin? Josie? Megan?
I actually also rang the vets in case they'd taken Lucy to the vet for some reason, which might be another reason that they hadn't called, you know, tied up with looking after the dog if it got run over or hurt. No joy there. Then I started ringing hospitals, mentioning the name, Russell. Have you had anybody brought in? You know, I was starting to get seriously worried by this time. There's a horrible possibility there might have been an accident, and the only reason Lin wouldn't phone me is that she'd rushed to a hospital.
John and I were looking around.
John?
Sean now turns to the police once more. His family has now been missing for over 5 hours.
Said, look, now I'm frantic. I've tried everything. They're not back. This is not right. There can't be a woman and children wandering around in the countryside at this time of night without something being desperately wrong. Unbeknown to me, the police had taken my first call very early on, very seriously. They'd already started the ball rolling to do something and get a search team together and a dog unit and all that sort of thing without me even knowing.
Liz and John Gregson rush to Sean's side as a team of police officers arrive at Granary Cottage.
I was aware of quite a commotion outside with a van full of officers arriving near midnight, this dog unit turning up, and them basically fanning off into the countryside. They'd come over to the house. I sent a couple of guys over by 11 o'clock in the evening who were interviewing me by that stage, just trying to get information on what do they look like, what are their descriptions, if we're going to put out a notice. Also the inevitable questions about, you know, how's your marriage doing? Have you had an argument? Is there any reason that she might have taken the children, sort of thing, you know, which of course is rubbish, but you accept that they have a job to do, so you answer as best you can.
Sean is instructed to wait at the family home, while officers search surrounding countryside. Restless and now stricken with panic, he anxiously waits for some news.
They called Liz and John Gregson outside, and one of the two police officers, and explained to them what was happening, and then the other guy came back in. And I knew the moment I saw this policeman coming back into the house, his body language, the look on his face, that something terrible was wrong.
Sean Russell's wife and 2 daughters have been missing for over 6 hours. Lin, Megan and Josie were last seen leaving school, but they haven't arrived home. Police have been out combing the countryside, and Sean now sees officers coming back to the cottage with news.
When you see that sort of thing in the movies, you know that the policeman's got the worst possible news, so I could tell straight away, and I just went hot and cold all over. Before he'd said a thing, I just knew that something terrible was about to happen, and he just explained that it was the worst thing he'd ever had to do. He had some terrible news for me. It looked like there'd been some sort of accident, but that all the members of my family, Lin and the 2 girls, had been killed. When the police team went out, it took them only a matter of minutes, because only a few hundred metres from the house along this lane was where the family were found, lying in the bushes there beside the road, the very same track that I'd driven up just a couple of hours before. The most that they said was something like, "There seems to be suspicious circumstances."
They found the scene, which of course was totally horrific to them, and it consisted of what the initial attending police officer thought were 3 dead people and the dead dog.
I remember vaguely just sort of going into an autopilot, numb feeling of half with it, half here, half not here, and gabbling out some questions about, well, where were they, or why has this happened, what has happened. They said, "We're going to need to take you over to the nearby police station at Deal for some more questions, but do you want to get some sleep?" Liz and John were very keen, actually, to have me go back with them, sort of, as it were, take me out of the clutches of the police for a little while, at least have a rest, before starting the obvious questioning the following morning. I didn't want to have to feel I had to be polite or friendly or diplomatic, and I didn't want to be a burden to friends either. So I said, I'll come to the police station with you now.
As Sean's world falls apart, his friends urge him to rest with them, but rest is an unlikely solace. Instead, he presses to help police and heads to the station.
I do remember when I was away from Liz and John that I did get quite upset in the car going to the police station, and shouting and screaming a bit. I do remember having sort of, I suppose you'd call it suicidal thoughts, because I remember saying things like, there must be an easy way out of this. Isn't there a sort of an inject? I made stupid statements like, you know, I'm sure there's a quick and easy way that one can be put to sleep with an inject, all that sort of silly stuff. But I guess I was a bit delirious by that stage. And I didn't know these 3 blokes in the car, and so there was nothing sort of holding me back on that journey through the dark lanes of Kent in the early hours of the morning, when I was at my lowest ebb.
I was in bed and the phone rang, and I was asked if I would go to the police station because there'd been a serious incident. And I was told when I got there, OK, well, your job is to go over to Deal police station where Dr. Sean Russell is, because his wife and children are missing. They haven't come home since school time. And so I went over there, and I went with Ed Tingley, a policeman who was obviously tasked to speak to Sean and to get as much information as possible about the family's last movements. It was really important to get as much information as we could at that time.
Sean Russell has been told his wife and 2 daughters have died in suspicious circumstances. Officers are now anxious to piece together the tragedy.
I was met by 2 family liaison officers who'd been sort of pulled from their beds in the early hours. That was Ed Tingley and Pauline Smith there, who were to become great friends and supporters.
I just kept thinking, how would I feel if my own family hadn't come home? You know, I had been so devastated, as he was. I mean, he was just in shock, really, I think is the word.
And they actually said, don't you want to get some sleep? Here's a blanket, here's a cup of coffee, you just, you know, curl up here on a sofa in the police station and try and get a couple of hours of kip before we have to start the old statement taking in the morning, you know.
I hadn't actually had any specific training in family liaison work. In fact, there hadn't even been a course at that time. My actual role was that of a domestic violence officer. And previous to that, I dealt with many incidents of child abuse and child neglect. I was on the family protection unit. So when I went, I didn't really know. I thought maybe I was just there to make the tea and offer the hankies and the sympathy. Of course, it was much later than that that I realised my role was going to change.
Sean begins the long and painful process of mapping out his family life. He needs to find answers to what has happened. 24 hours ago, he had a loving wife and 2 beautiful daughters. Now, everything has gone. Then an officer comes with news.
I was sort of half asleep when I remember Ed coming in and saying there's been a big development.
By this time, the family had been found and taken straight to the hospital. We thought everyone had died, including the family dog.
If you can help us, give us a description.
He said, we told you last night that we thought all your family members were dead, but we've discovered this morning that one seems to have survived. One of the girls seems to still be alive.
"24 hours ago, Dr. Sean Russell had an idyllic family life. Now, his world is shattered. His wife and daughters have seemingly been found dead down a country lane. But in a sudden twist of fate, some news has just brought a ray of light.
Doctor was going about his business, and one of the police officers was there, and he noticed some flicker of life, and he called to the doctor. And the doctor jumped over and said, no, you're right. This one's still alive. Get her to hospital. It kind of switched me from complete despair, sort of feeling of sort of suicidal ideas, I can't go on, there's no point to go on, suddenly to having a reason to go on at last, something to hold on to.
If you can help us.
I remember Ed coming back into the room and saying that he had this information for Sean, and Sean asking which one was it, and did she have freckles or not? And it was quite heartbreaking, really, because we didn't actually know at that time.
Sean now faces a traumatic journey to London to identify which member of his family has survived.
Even through the glass doors from outside ICU, and with all the masks and tubes and things, I could see some freckles on the top of the nose over the mask, and I knew that was Josie.
As Sean tries to come to terms with the fact that his eldest daughter is somehow clinging to life, the news of the tragedy is starting to trickle through to close ones in their village.
remember waking up and Mum was asleep, which was really weird because she was always up before me because she started work really early. I remember being really excited that I'd woken up before her, and I rushed to get ready and went downstairs, and Dad told me that he had something to tell me and it wasn't very nice news. And I remember being told, and I kind of didn't feel anything. I think I was just numb. I think I was too young to really understand.
We all went into a state of shock. When you're a teacher, you're responsible, or you feel ultimately very, very responsible for the children in your care. It was actually a very difficult thing to tell the children, and I found it particularly difficult because two of my own two children were actually involved. My son was in my class, so I was telling my class and I was having to tell my son at the same time. And my daughter was in Megan's class, and we didn't know at the time which of the two children was actually alive.
Villagers are now waking up to a double murder in their tranquil surroundings. As police contain the crime scene, the media is already picking up on the tragedy.
I heard about it actually on the news in my car travelling to London. This was in the morning on the 10th, the day after the murder.
There was enough in that report that would have made close friends and relatives realise who the victim was.
We would suddenly find members of the media sort of coming from behind bushes and at the edge of the school playground, and we were just aware that there were lots of people around that we didn't know.
Well, certainly I've never known an investigation quite like this for the media involvement, which created a lot of issues.
I remember Ed looking a bit shocked. How's the news got out so quickly? Before we've even had a chance to tell everybody in the family. He said, OK, here's a mobile phone, Peter and Irene up in Sutton Coldfield, Lin's parents. And I could tell the moment I heard them heard Peter on the phone, that he knew already.
As Lin's parents are comforted, media interest grows by the minute. Meanwhile, police must establish what has happened as quickly as possible.
I went straight to the crime scene, which had been preserved, and then started to take control of the investigation from there. First of all, it's very important that we secure the scene forensically, so we can send our people in to get forensic evidence and to send scientists in. We then had to contain a much wider area because it was quite likely things had been discarded by the offender or offenders. One of my main concerns was finding out who witnessed this, if anybody, and the one person that obviously did was Josie Russell.
Josie now lies seriously ill in hospital, and doctors are unsure if she'll survive the night.
Kind of described it as feeling like at the bottom of a big dark pit, and like a prisoner in one of those old pit sort of cells, and just very dark and very gloomy and with no hope of a future. But that changed instantly when I heard that Josie was alive, at least, even though I didn't know for how much longer she might be alive or what state she might be in if she survived.
Police now face one of the country's biggest murder hunts. 3 people have been brutally attacked with no apparent motive. A killer is on the loose, and Sean's one glimmer of hope lies with horrific injuries. He now has an agonising wait to see if she'll pull through.
By the end of that first day that Josie was in hospital, they'd carried out an operation of several hours, done a whole lot of tests. We were told she had serious head injuries, brain injuries. You know, she's on full life support. I had no idea whether she would survive at all.
Sean Russell's world has fallen apart. Less than 24 hours ago, he had a perfect family setting, a loving wife and 2 beautiful daughters. Now, he sits in the hospital, clinging to the hope his eldest daughter will regain consciousness. His wife and youngest daughter have been killed. in an unprovoked attack.
I had no idea whether she would survive at all. I was still thinking, am I going to be asked for permission for them to switch the machines off, you see? Is she going to have any brain function, this, that and the other? Is she going to be a vegetable?
As Josie's life hangs in the balance, it is becoming clear to the police just how vital her recollection of the attack will be to the investigation.
Right from the start of this, Josie was uppermost in our mind. Obviously the first thing was her recovery and medical treatment. And we also had to consider her safety as well, because the offender was still at large and she was still alive and in hospital. So we had to look at protecting her. But running in tandem with that was, from an investigative point of view, is that she possibly could remember what happened and who attacked her and why.
The only surviving witness now lies in hospital. As officers watch over Josie's safety, doctors monitor her condition. Remarkably, and against all odds, they start to see a change.
It was that gradual progression from the lowest of the low, verge of death, intensive care, bit by bit coming out of it as the days progressed. I said, well, is she going to pull through? And he said, oh yes, there should be no worries about that. It was a bit of a shock, and a very, very welcome shock, very pleasing. She's going to have problems. She's got a brain injury that have affected this particular area. She's likely to lead to speech and language problems, but possibly some physical problems, but she should come through. It may be weeks, months, but she should be back on her feet, you know, eventually.
This news comes at a vital point for officers. Josie is on the mend, but is delicate, and her injuries could become the barrier in telling her story. Yet police are no closer to catching the killer. They must find a way of communicating with Josie. Her evidence is now the crux of their investigation.
We had a number of people that we were looking at very closely, and they were eliminated from the inquiry.
Right, okay.
We made many appeals for information, specific information, general information, and that all came in thick and fast.
Maybe about mid-30s, I think. Right, okay. And do you know what time this was?
And each was analysed, and most of it turned out to be a blind alley.
We're now faced with a little girl who was at the murder scene, who may or may not remember, who held the key really to what had actually happened, because nobody could tell us. So I had to try and work out a way of how to extract all this information from her. And it was painstaking.
They had to, you know, cut away these bits of bone and parts of the brain, which did eventually lead to some speech and language, reading, writing problems.
Eventually she started going to like a speech therapy class, and they would hold various pictures up in front of her. She'd kind of try to show you what she knew she was understanding, so we knew there was a bit of understanding there. We stayed with her constantly, because who knew at any one time if she was actually going to speak? Of course, it was only after all the investigations on the surgery that, you know, they were looking at what had happened to her, that we realised the communication site of the brain had been damaged.
It's amazing to me to this day that they could predict, because of the area of the brain that had been affected, what the likely problems might be in the future.
Much to everyone's surprise, Josie's recovery is far quicker than anticipated.
6 weeks in hospital, and amazingly, that's all it was. 1.5 months, 6 weeks in hospital, from being on the verge of death to being able to go home. Even a couple of doctors talked about this is a miracle. That resilience, that strength, not only physical strength, which maybe most young children have, but sort of psychological strength was very evident. She was kind of like a battler.
I interviewed Josie and Ed did all the videoing, and I started to work on scrapbooks. I thought that would be a fabulous way, really, of testing her knowledge. I was able to build up all the things that led up to the swimming gala.
As Pauline and Ed gradually pieced together the attack with Josie, their colleagues push to find other clues.
This became the most extensive and difficult forensic examination I've certainly ever dealt with in my career. If you've got a murder that happens in a room, you can seal it off and you can do all sorts of things that you couldn't in an outside location. It wasn't just outside, it was in a wood with trees and leaves, and it was in the summer where the leaves were full on the trees. And that meant lots and lots of surfaces, inappropriate surfaces to get fingerprints from, to get DNA from. So it was a very, very difficult scene.
She was obviously growing in strength, but she couldn't actually verbalise. So I thought by making models, it would give her an opportunity to really get off her chest what had happened, because, you know, when someone is traumatised, generally need to talk about it, and she couldn't.
We found, with the help of a witness, some blood-stained toweling and clothing in a nearby location, and that proved very useful and allowed us to piece together what had happened. There was a hammer found close by this location, which was investigated very thoroughly. There is some doubt as to whether this hammer actually was part and parcel of the attack. But nonetheless, the post-mortem examinations clearly identified the murder weapon as a hammer. It was very frustrating in that hardly anything materialised from the forensic work.
As the months continue, police are frustrated by no major breakthrough. Josie continues to improve. She returns to school, and her statement could hold the key to the attack. All the while, the close-knit community in Canterbury are left in limbo, with a killer still in their midst.
Everyone was a lot more worried, you know, for their children. Before, you could just walk down to the field and it wouldn't be a problem. And now there's this thought that there's this just psycho on the loose, you know, and it's just not safe anymore. And this kind of pristine place where you once felt really safe, you just didn't anymore.
A lot of the parents actually felt the need to come and be with us all at school for quite some time, actually. So many of them would just come and sit and have a coffee at the edge of the playground. And it served lots of purposes. They knew their child was safe, but also they were helping us to feel safe as well. It was a bit like a ripple in a pond. It sort of spread out because there were lots of little country schools in this area, and it made everybody question their safety.
For Sean, the tranquility of Kent has been broken forever. A few months after the tragedy, he moves Josie back to Wales. Meanwhile, the hunt continues, and everyone prays for some answers to Lin and Megan's tragic death. As the months roll on, Josie manages to piece together that fateful day.
Christmas 1996, we were back in Wales just in time for Christmas. I mean, that didn't mean that the police work stopped. Ed and Pauline, poor guys, had to then do commuting up to North Wales.
Sean was desperate to take Josie back to where they knew, where they'd been living before. Josie was able to show us with the little models how they climbed over the gate or how they opened the gate for Lin to walk through, and Josie really got into this, and we could see that she was really growing. Her knowledge base she was getting better and better, and she was able to start communicating more.
After months of rehabilitation and Josie's version of events, police now appeal for a second time to catch the killer. 1 year after the murders.
And that for the first time suggested that Michael Stone might be the offender, and he became a suspect very shortly after that broadcast.
At last, police receive a vital lead they've been looking for. A doctor could hold the key.
He was aware that this particular patient of his had been talking about things like this, and he gave a name to the police, which the police followed up.
When Michael Stone was first identified as a possible suspect, that then triggered an awful lot of investigative activity around him, his background, his movements, his ability to do this sort of thing, his mobility to do this sort of thing, his vehicle, so on and so forth. And that culminated in his arrest.
As Michael Stone is arrested, his background comes to light. He was a habitual drug user with violent fantasies who knew the area well. Claims he had spoken of the desire to kill shortly before the murders now come to the fore. But one question still remains. What was the motive?
We considered it may be robbery, it could be theft. There were other factors like the family dog was killed. Why? Was that just gratuitous violence, or was it done for a purpose? Because of the remoteness of the location, it did strike us that it was somebody that lived locally or somebody that had knowledge of the area. And the fact that a car was used suggested perhaps it wasn't immediately local, but somebody had travelled into the scene. If you put all those things together, there was no obvious motive that emerged.
After months of agonising detective work and heartache for the Russells, they may now be a step closer to uncovering the murders. Michael Stone goes on trial a year after his arrest.
I asked them some things, but I didn't want to dig too far into their inquiry. When a person was found, it only sort of slowly built up, not all at once, that yes, this is a likely person.
It was a momentous thing to happen, but it left us with as many questions as it started to answer.
Again, I wouldn't say that there was a sort of sudden sense of eureka. They found the person.
Stone is found guilty on 2 counts of murder and the attempted murder of Josie. He is given 3 life sentences. The devastating facts about the 9th of July 1996 now come to light.
The girls had gone to their swimming gala in Canterbury with the school.
Just finished swimming and we all came back on the coach, and then our parents would pick us up. And my mum picked me up in the car and Lin was walking to pick Josie up.
Lin had walked with Lucy, the dog, across the country lane, 1.5 miles away to Goodnestone to wait for them and collect them.
I knew obviously we were going to Brownies that afternoon, and Mum and I beeped the horn because we saw Josie, Lin and Megan just about to walk down the steps. And we thought, oh, we'll give them a lift home. And we beeped. And I remember we beeped quite a few times, and I thought it was really weird how they didn't hear us. And we just thought, oh, that's fine. We'll just see her later. And if they had heard us, we would have given them a lift home.
They would have been chirruping away about the fun they'd had at the swimming gala, and they would have walked down Cherry Garden Lane, and that is when the whole event started to unfold of the person, as Josie described it, them passing a man in a car parked, and then as they walked down the lane, the car following them, etc., and then the attack ensuing from that.
The violence used was excessive, far more excessive than was needed to control the victims.
Probably the reason that Josie survived was that the damage to her skull was greater than to the other 2. It meant the pressure on the brain that causes all sorts of damage was released naturally, and the cold temperatures of her lying for several hours sort of slowed down the development of the injury and she probably pulled through because of the extent of the damage to her skull rather than the opposite. A peculiar paradox there.
The unprovoked hammer attack on the Russells raised wide-scale debate on the British laws and the strength of the Mental Health Act. Should it be reassessed?
It transpired that Michael Stone was one of these people that had suffered a very traumatic mental illness. He should never have been put in a position where he could actually do anything like this.
We know enough now that you probably could identify real at-risk, potentially violent people who ought to be taken into care and go through some form of treatment and drug control and this sort of thing. But there are people certainly on the civil liberties side who say, no, you can't go down that route, it's thin wedge.
People with mental health issues, I personally feel, are not really looked after that well.
There are experiments going on with people who are already in prison to see if particular lines of treatment can be followed for people who were previously classified as being untreatable. So this is still going on, and it's not clear what the outcome will be.
It would be wonderful if we had a magic wand and we could just wipe the evil out of this world. Unfortunately, we don't have that. We're not magic. And I think legislation should be changed and it should be moved on as these awful things happen.
Since Michael Stone's conviction, he has appealed twice and won a retrial. His attempts have failed. He continues to serve his sentence.
The next thing would be to say, you know, say sorry. I'm sorry I did it. Express remorse. It makes a big difference. You've always got that sort of lack of finality.
Sean and Josie's life is now very different. For years, they have humbled the nation with their resilience and courage to continue on with their lives.
We've been shown the depth of on one side, the worst side of human nature, but against that we've been shown the best side of human nature, all the people that took an interest in us and were so kind to us and generous and supported us through all of this. Okay, we had a mad, crazy, chance in a million, one-off thing happen to us. And of course we'll never forget that, you'll never get over it. But we're trying to make the best we can of life, and the way Josie does is what gives me the strength and to feel that I can face the future, and you know, seeing her making such a good job out of her life makes it a lot easier for me to carry on.
Throughout the day, local people have joined police officers to search the fields and woods around where Sarah Payne went missing. Sarah had been playing outside with her younger sister and two older brothers when they became separated.
On the 1st of July 2000, 8-year-old Sarah Payne vanished while playing one summer's eve. 17 days later, she was found, murdered. Roy Whiting, an already convicted paedophile, had taken her life. What was to follow became one of the biggest public outcries in UK history. Sarah's family, left torn apart by the devastation, were surged to campaign for a major change in British law, determined Sarah's death would not be in vain, making this a crime that shook Britain.